Good afternoon, committee. Welcome to a new week. Call the meeting to order and open the hearing on House Bill 2609. Revisor Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. House Bill 2609 would allow 15-year-old restricted driver's license holders the ability to drive directly to and from the worship service of any religious organization. Religious organization is defined in the Motor Vehicle Driver's License Act as essentially any religious group that maintains an established place of worship and has a schedule of services at least on a weekly basis, if not more. A restricted license allows certain other driving privileges that are listed in statute KSA 8-2-101. Those will not be affected. The only thing we're doing in the bill is adding that new sort of, we're going to call it restriction or allowance in this case. So it's on page 2, lines 14 and 15, while going directly to or from any religious worship service held by a religious organization. That language matches similar allowances for 16 and 17-year-old restricted driver's license holders. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the breakdown of this. Just one question. So this doesn't necessarily pertain to what the proposed change is, but I'm reading on page 2, line 11, on days when the school is in session, the most direct route, are they only able to go to school and back and not school activities, school sporting events? Is that not covered in this, or is it just to schools?
For 15-year-old, it's just to school for the purpose of school attendance. Going to, like, when you get a restricted license as a 16-year-old, you are authorized to go to authorized school activities as well. So it's just a difference in the age of what's allowed.
Okay, and one more, Mr. Chair, if I may. The proposed changes, while going directly to or from any religious worship service held by a religious organization, is that just the service? So I'm Catholic, we go to church on Sunday morning. That would just be the church service. That wouldn't be, our Wednesday night PSR meetings or anything like that.
I think it actually would include that. I think by saying any worship service, would be construed pretty broadly to include other activities.
So it would be fair to say that in this instance, we're counting the religious worship service plus any related activities to that worship service, but we're excluding any activities that relate to school. That would be pretty fair if this were to become law, other than schooling.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm furiously trying to read here and I don't see it. Does this preclude, it does preclude having any passengers in the car, correct? It's just the individual?
Yes, I believe there is some sort of restriction on who can be in the vehicle when you're a 15-year-old restricted. Let me read that a little closer and get an answer back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for the revisor? Seeing none, thank you. First proponent I have is Representative Charlotte Esau. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Prell, Vice Chairman Delperdang, Ranking Member Helgerson, members of the committee, thank you for considering and allowing me the opportunity to testify in support of HB 2609. This bill is a result of a friend contacting me one night and saying that they would like to see a way that their 15-year-old restricted driver could drive to church on their own. And I said, well, let's see what we can do. We'll look at statute, and you have the bill in front of you now. I won't duplicate what he's going to share in his testimony, so I'll skip on from that. One of the things that I found very quickly when I started to talk about this bill with a couple of folks is that it was very much presumed that we could do this, or if we couldn't do it, why couldn't we do it? And so that's why I opened it up for a lot of co-sponsors. I was pleasantly surprised to see how many jumped on board, but we all agreed that this was an important change that we should consider. And one of the questions I fielded a lot, the revisor answered, so I won't go over that. That was a concern of folks, can they still go to Bible study with this, et cetera. And it's also my understanding that this doesn't expand who can be in the car. It simply allows one more exception of where you can drive to. So I'd be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Are there any questions? Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this. I think this is a very important discussion that we should have. The wording of this, while going directly to or from any religious worship service held by a religious organization, it just seems really narrow to me. And I know the revisor said that this includes any activities. I mean, would it be objectionable to put or related religious activities in there as well, or?
So that was my question when I got the language, because I wasn't trying to restrict it, as you say, to Sunday morning, a specific 1-hour worship service. As long as the definition allows for that, and those who would oversee enforcement, et cetera, understand it in the same way, as long as the intent is there, I'm comfortable with however it's worded. If it needs to be more clear, I'm okay with that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there further questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you presenting this to us. Part that's got me a little concerned, have you any number or idea how many religions are practiced in Kansas?
Off the top of my head, that I do not know. It is possible that one of the other conferees might actually know the answer to that question.
Because what I'm hearing, and then for you and I, it's probably a Sunday morning service. For others, it may be Seventh-day Adventists who are cruising around on Saturdays. For others, it's Wednesdays. Others, it's Thursdays. So essentially, we're opening it up. So the next question I would ask is, do we have to show any proof we are heading to a given service? If I'm out cruising around on a Saturday night at 15 years old in a car, and I get pulled over, can I say, well, I'm Seventh-day Adventist, I'm heading off to my worship service? Do I need to be able to prove such a thing?
Well, I don't believe we actually have to prove it when it comes to work and school, but there's nothing to stop an officer from, say, following you to make sure you're actually going where you said you were going. But beyond that, can't tell you exactly how they enforce it with work and school, so I assume it would be similar.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next proponent I have is Pastor Jeff Pipo, and he's remote, and hopefully I didn't butcher your name too badly.
It was very good, actually. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, Ranking Member, and other members, thank you for allowing me to testify in support of HB 2609, and thank you for allowing me to testify remotely. I appreciate that. So I am a pastor and a father of 6 children. A couple years ago, I had to fire our youth leader, which meant I had to take over since I was the pastor. So I was leading a youth group for a couple years, finally hired someone to take over the youth position. And I thought, great, now I won't have to come on Wednesday nights anymore. My daughter can just drive them, until I realized she was only 15. She was only allowed to drive to work or school. And I thought, oh man, that's not good, because I love my children, but I don't love driving them everywhere. So I decided to look into the law a little bit. I contacted Representative Esau and Representative Howe, and there's really just 2 points that I would like to make today. I submitted a report that you can read, so I'm not going to read it, but I just would like to summarize a couple points. And the first one is about religious freedom. The Kansas Bill of Rights, as you probably know, stands stronger than the United States Bill of Rights when it comes to religious freedom. It says the right to worship God according to the dictates of conscience shall never be infringed, nor shall any control or any interference of the rights of conscience be permitted. Of course, we know the Supreme Court has ruled that we must have a compelling reason to deny someone liberty to utilize their religious rights. And of course, we have compelling reasons not to allow a 10-year-old to drive to religious services. That'd be a little dangerous. But if the state allows a teenager to drive to work or to school alone, then we don't really have a compelling reason to stop them from driving to a religious service, which is constitutionally protected. The second thing I would like to point out has to do with safety. We allow a 15-year-old to drive to school. So I would like to be clear that driving to religious events is likely far safer than driving to school. So the average high school in Kansas has 433 students. Some of them have over 2,000 students. The average church in Kansas would have around 10 to 15 students of driving age. I even contacted the largest church in Kansas, the Church of the Resurrection. And before COVID started, they would have 100 to 150 high schoolers attending their youth group. This means the biggest church in Kansas has less high schoolers going to the youth group than an average high school. Now, I've driven a lot of kids to high school, and I don't know how many of you have seen their parking lots before and after school, but I kind of feel like I'm watching an episode of the Dukes of Hazzard. It can be a little crazy. And there are far less students attending church events on average. And in case anyone's wondering, churches are, on average in Kansas, about the same distance from homes as schools are, as a high school is, 15 minutes or less for the average church. As I was listening to the introduction, there was a question about who would be able to ride with the students. You're the experts, but I believe 15-year-olds can take their siblings to school with them. And so I think it would make sense if siblings could ride with the driver. At least that was my original intention when I brought that to the representatives. So thank you for allowing me to testify in favor of HB 2609, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, I have Braden Jones, a student from Linwood. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman and committee. My name is Braden Jones, and I'm a 14-year-old and attend Baserland Middle School, and in a few months, I will be testing for my restricted license. I have a learner's permit and will be taking driver's ed. I would like to tell you why your committee should vote to change in the restricted license to let students like me drive to church as well as school and work if we pass the test. Many students live long distance from where they go to school or maybe work on a farm. If they pass all of the state driving tests, they can go to and from school or their farm to do chores. There are also many good young drivers who also attend their churches for youth events, confirmation, or services. Many times our parents or other people must take us to church since the restricted license do not allow us to drive ourselves to church events like it does for jobs or schools. This can be a hardship for those of us like me who live in the country, and means sometimes we just do not get to go to places we cannot take ourselves. My father is gone with the Army for a long time, staying in Kentucky, and my mother must try to work a full-time job and get me and my 6-year-old sister to all kinds of events. My grandparents help out, getting us to places, but also both work and usually have to sit and wait for 1 to 2 hours at churches until our meetings are done. Our football coach has a rule for us that tells us in what order we should live our lives, and it is faith, family, and football. So if I'm allowed to drive somewhere, I would appreciate being able to also drive the church. Thank you all for letting me speak. I would be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Neely.
You stated that your father was stationed elsewhere.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Who is it that's helping you learn how to drive?
Unfortunately, my grandpa.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Are there further questions? Seeing none, thank you. You did a nice job.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak as a proponent? Hearing none, I do have written testimony, and you have it before you from Representative Brandon Woodard. Does anyone wish to speak as a neutral or an opponent? I have none listed. Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I just wanted to mention, I'm a member of the Catholic faith. We have religious services every day. It came up in the discussion, would it be on Wednesday or, Sunday? I quite often see youth at daily mass So I would expect that you should be looking at that there would be 15-year-olds driving to church every day, or a possibility of every day. Hopefully it would be every day, but, so, thank you.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank my constituent, Pastor Jeff, for being with us today. And also as a father of a 14-year-old, I very much support this legislation and ask the committee's support.
I see no opponents and no neutral. With that, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2609 and open the hearing on House Bill 2628. And Revisor Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee House Bill 2628 would expand the definition of reckless driving to include anyone who operates a vehicle at 100 miles per hour or more. This bill, definition's found in KSA 8-1566, which provides the current definition of reckless driving as any person who drives any vehicle in a willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property. And as I said, that definition would now include any person who operates a vehicle at a speed of 100 miles per hour or more, except as provided in KSA 8-1506, which are certain allowances for authorized emergency vehicles. The penalties and fines provided in KSA 8-1566 will remain unchanged. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so according to Section 1, it would be that except as provided in KSA 8-1506. So what would that be? What would that situation be?
That's a statute that allows authorized emergency vehicles, such as law enforcement vehicles, ambulances, certain allowances to disregard some of the traffic code when they're in pursuit of or taking certain actions.
Okay, so we're talking about 100 miles an hour. Is that any length of time, distance, or I don't want to say that, whatever. What I'm getting at is, I run a Hemi. And there's times when I'm coming down the highway and you might stand on to make it, and next thing you look down, you're triple digits. But you don't stay there. Sometimes you need that triple digit.
Well, I think in this case, it would be if you do that speed in front of an officer and get pulled over for it, that's when the statute would take effect.
Thank you very much. Looks like I've got an amendment coming.
Representative Proctor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if the previous speaker, is that going to be only Hemis or all V8s exempted from the bill? No, sir, the question I had for the revisor, does one of these KSAs, one of these statutes specify on public roads? Or is this operating, even if you're on a track and you're doing 100 miles an hour, you're in violation?
The statute doesn't actually say on the highway, so it's just operating a vehicle. Presumably it would be on a highway, but.
If I go down to the Mocan dragway with my Corvette, I'm in violation if I bust 100.
Well, no, at that point, yeah, it's regulating traffic on highway. So I guess that would be sort of a prerequisite that it would be on a highway and not like a controlled location like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for that explanation. To your knowledge, is the highest speed limit we have in Kansas 75 on the turnpike?
That's my understanding. I'm pretty sure that's the max.
Okay. I'll save my further questions for the conferees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To expound on the question over here for 8-1566, I was hoping maybe you could dig into it a little bit, because I too question, does this apply to police and troopers? And if they're in hot pursuit, hands off. But is there a current limit on how fast they can exceed the speed limit if they're going from point A to point B, not chasing someone?
I believe the statute, and I can look at the exact wording, it's when they're engaged in certain actions, and they do have to, there's a kind of a phrase that they have to operate with the due regard for the safety of others and property. So that's kind of a somewhat of a limit for authorized emergency vehicle operation.
And I know we're not changing Section A. I think that already is there, but I was just, for the disregard and safety of persons of property, just curious, does texting fall into that? Does someone driving while they're holding a dog fit into that? Does somebody driving while they're putting on makeup fit into that? You see it all the time.
It could in certain circumstances. It's a pretty broad definition. It's sort of up to the enforcing officer or the person who makes the traffic stop to determine what's charged sometimes in those circumstances.
Can I make one more comment? To Representative Hauser, I think my Hemi's bigger than yours.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of my colleagues brought up, is there any qualifiers for a police officer, trooper, sheriff, whatever, to exceed the speed limit? And they can if they have their emergency equipment on their vehicle operating at the time that they're, as somebody said, busting the speed limit.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is another part of that statute is lights and sirens are required.
And I'm pretty sure that's probably policy on most police and sheriff's department as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me a second chance at this. Is there a statute or anything regulating the speed that which you may pass? Or is it just up to your discretion? You know what I'm saying? Like, responsible driver or whatever. Because you know, if you're in a lane running 60 mile an hour or 55 behind somebody in a 65, you're going to obviously break the speed limit as you pass. So is there a statute regulating that anywhere?
I would have to look into whether there's actual speed limit on passing. And I know there probably is something on overtaking and passing, kind of the duties you have to, but I don't know if there's a speed attached to those. But I'll get an answer and look for it for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further questions, thank you. I have one proponent listed to speak here, as that's Colonel Jones, Superintendent of the Kansas Highway Patrol. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chair and ranking members and committee members here. I am Herman Jones, Superintendent of Kansas Highway Patrol, and hopefully we can answer some of the questions that have come up here. We've submitted some written testimony as well as my testimony here today, but I just want to kind of go through some of the highlights of why we feel this is an opportune time to take something that we're seeing as a trend for traffic safety. So, obviously, driving more than 100 miles an hour on our state and federal highways or so is we were looking for that to be deemed reckless driving there, and here's why. One is greater speeds creates more of an issue for anyone that's using the highways. Individuals have a greater chance of losing control. If you have a flat tire or blowout at 100 miles an hour, obviously it's going to take greater amount of control for a vehicle to bring that down to a safe situation there. Also, effectively, your seatbelts, airbags, and other safety devices that are inside and also outside of the vehicle there are reduced to a certain point. Guardrails and medians are able to withstand certain types of speeds, but when you get up to that certain point there, it takes quite a bit of damage and also it transpires to the individuals and occupants of a vehicle. So when you're speeding, as you speed, it quadruples on your stopping distance. So when individuals are to react, a typical reaction there, they're going to have to be as prudent and as more reactive to certain situations there. So instead of, you typically, when you're driving down the highway or so, following distance is about 2 to 4 seconds or so. So when you're traveling at 100 miles an hour, obviously following distance to be able to react to something in front of you there is going to have to be increased or so. And for a typical individual, 3/4 of a second to a second is a typical reaction time. I don't have those statistics for you, but when you're traveling 100 miles an hour, basically stopping distance, again, is going to quadruple to that right there. This also, when individuals are traveling at 100 miles an hour, it obviously puts individuals at risk of danger if someone is not able to control their vehicles, but also for the law enforcement officers when they're out to enforce the laws and trying to keep the highways as safe as possible there. So the question was, obviously, if an individual is doing 100 miles an hour, and that's a violation, obviously for us in law enforcement, not just troopers, this is the sheriff, the police department, and those type of things, it puts us at a greater risk now that we have to drive faster to be able to catch someone, or even at that point driving to a point to stop someone. I will say that generally speaking, law enforcement are especially trained in driving those types of speeds right there. But at any time that anyone is driving at those type of things, we are also at risk for individuals that are not properly trained and ready to do with those type of speeds. Oh, in written testimony, we talk about some of the factors or some of the information that's there. NHTSA, or National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, there says in 2019 they experienced or showed that speeds had increased 25% across the nation, and also that with that fatalities increased, and there is a greater chance that speeds such as that have a contributing factor for fatalities. Right here in Kansas, KDOT, in 2020, there were over 4,500 speed-related crashes. 88 of those resulted in death. 1,400, over 1,400 injury crashes occurred due to speeds, which equates to about $1.6 billion of estimates of damages and estimated costs. Now, slightly lower than 2019, when we have vehicle miles traveled decreased slightly. As we understand, there were less vehicles that traveled on the highways when we dealt with the COVID and pandemic and those type of things right there. Contrary to that, we saw speeds go up. We saw speeds go up and also fatalities, more fatalities on that. Here in Kansas, 100+ miles per hour citations that were issued. In 2019, 1,758. In 2020, 2,825. Now, mind you, these are 100 miles an hour plus of what we've seen. 2021, we saw 3,309 citations issued for speeds of 100 plus. In 2022, so far this year, 3,800 have been issued. We expect that's the number that we would see just off of January, which is 319. So if you take that 319 times 12, we had to estimate there's going to be 3,800 speed violations of 100 plus. Other states are experiencing some of the same things. I speak with many of the superintendents of the Highway Patrol from our surrounding states and also in our region. In Missouri, they saw an increase. In 2019, there was over 1,600 citations for 100 miles an hour. In 2020 and 2021, over 26 citations were issued in Missouri. In Oklahoma, in 2019, 1,300 citations were issued. In 2021, 1,700. In Nebraska, 601 in 2019, 982 on the average for 2020 and 2021. So I say that in the fact that we have seen a trend of individuals have gone up in the speeds, the fatalities and crashes have also increased. So what we would say is that the benefit of this bill obviously would be able to allow us to have more of an influence on individuals, whereas before, right now, a speed citation is effective to the speed that they go with. With here, it becomes more of a bang, if you will, for what we do with stopping when it is reckless driving. It is an arrestable offense at this particular time, as just a speed alone is not. It's an infraction. It would also require individuals to appear before court, and there are mandatory jails for reckless driving, whereas right now it does not include that. We would believe that it would be a greater deterrent for individuals that want to drive at 100 miles an hour over the speed limit. And this also, when we talk about reckless driving, it can be very subjective of what constitutes reckless driving. This right there is a little more explicit for officers when they're enforcing the law, when it's over 100 miles an hour. In conclusion, I would feel that our proposal for this would strongly be considered safety for you, me, and anybody else that travels on the highways, simply for what we've seen. And I appreciate your opportunity to speak on this behalf, and I stand for any questions.
Questions for Colonel Jones? Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today, talk to us, and thank you for your service. Those large numbers of traffic citations in Kansas for over 100 miles an hour, can you give us just, I'm trying to get a sense of the scale of that in relation to others. Do you know the total number of traffic citations issued?
I don't have that, but I can get that information for you, but I've seen it. It's just to increase incrementally for what we've seen of speeds of 10, 15, 20 miles an hour is dramatic compared to what we've seen of 100.
Right, and I'm trying to get a picture, have all traffic citations gone up? Yeah, I mean, because if all traffic citations have gone up, then maybe it's not as dramatic an increase as if it's just in this one classification of traffic citations.
Well, I think what the relationship we're saying is that when it's that much faster, we're more vulnerable for the safety, whereas 10 over still is a safety issue.
Right, yeah, and I don't disagree with you. What I'm trying to get at is the statistic indicate that we're catching more people, or that there's actually a problem, a larger problem, and that's just what I'm trying to get a scale of. So if you could just find out for me how many total traffic citations. But then my other question, it's only a deterrent if people know about it. Does your agency have an advertising budget for public safety, public service announcements? So if we were to pass this law, you'd be able to tell people, hey, you're going to jail now if you do this.
Yes, and to that point is very much so, and our communication with the public is from our public information officers and training, teaching, and public contacts with individuals, but also social media. When we're talking about Twitter accounts, and we're talking about Facebook and so much, we send those informations out. And occasionally we'll have where we will send out a media release, or I would say a public announcement message that goes out through some of the televisions and radios.
Mr. Chair, just kind of as a comment, we're spending tens of millions of dollars advertising vaccines over at KDHE, and I think that if they could just take a tiny portion of this budget, send it over you guys to advertise that, hey, you're going to get yourself somebody else killed driving like an idiot. I think that, this is in a way another symptom of the shutdowns and everything, that the highways were, emptier, and so people did stupid things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much, Colonel.
Thank you.
Can you tell me more what the ramifications are for treating it differently at 100 miles an hour. You said that it's an arrest violation, so meaning that if I'm driving 100 miles an hour on any road, police officer can automatically arrest me for that, but right now they can't. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Are there any other additional penalties that we should be aware of?
As
You know,
far
does the fine go up dramatically once you hit reckless?
Well, at the same time, yes, it could be a difference there, whereas right now it's a speed violation. It's incrementally, it goes up by a scale that we have, and that's it. Whereas with this, it could actually be a fine assessed by the courts that has a wider spread.
Okay. Why 100 rather than 95?
We were, we looked at that or so, and at that particular time, it was trying to come up what is excess. Obviously, 100 miles an hour. We've seen those type of things right there. It could be 95. It can then be 85 or so. But for our speeds, the highest speed posted speed limit is 75. We felt that 25 over becomes that critical point.
The reason I'm kind of posing that, if I'm driving on the turnpike, as I do all the time, and periodically I see somebody pass me at probably close to 100 miles an hour, it may be reckless, it may be dangerous, but it's so different than if I'm on 54 highway outside of Wichita and somebody drives past me at 100 miles an hour when it is posted at 60 miles an hour. They're two dramatic differences because one is a pretty much a no entrance road on the turnpike, and the other one has cross streets on a regular basis. And there, I tend to say that someone driving 85, 90 miles an hour is reckless. You want to comment on those?
Yeah, and to that point, then we were trying to, because you get into different scenarios of what we said, and so as you say, interstate, federal highway is generally going to be restricted or controlled access there. You're going to have some limits when you talk about inside of a city or so. If you're doing 20 over the speed limit, that could be just as reckless, or it can be construed as reckless or so, but without trying to get to those different variables, because you have 20 miles an hour speed limits, 25, 30, and those type of things right there, then you would have to try to differentiate what is and what isn't reckless in that situation right there. If an officer felt it was deemed to be reckless with other variables that come with that, then I believe that the officer has that discretion to police that charge with that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Colonel, for being here today. And I appreciate the questions from the ranking member, because that's where I was kind of going along earlier when I asked a question about the turnpike and the speed limit. I'm just curious, so at what speed to you would be fast enough if Representative Hauser is in his Hemi and he's going at 120 miles an hour down the turnpike leaving Topeka? Does that fall into willful or wanted disregard for the safety of persons or property? At what speed, is there a speed that would qualify as?
I don't, that's the difficulties there. There's hardly anything that, there would be other variables that could fall into that as well. But at the same time, if an individual, I don't think someone's driving 100 miles an hour is just a mistake. They're willfully wanting to drive that fast.
Yeah, and I agree with that. What's the fastest you've personally pulled someone over at? Over 100?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And it wasn't me, I swear.
It wasn't.
No. Okay, so you pull someone over, let's say 110, 115. Currently, in the state of Kansas, all you can issue them is just a traffic citation.
Depending on what the other variables, I'll if I can answer that. Here recently, we were talking about the turnpike as what and it's other highways where we've seen this. here recently, within the last year, we had a vehicle at 200 miles an hour. 200 miles an hour on the turnpike. And I would say it wasn't in the 75, it was a construction zone.
And those fines, I believe,
Now,
triple?
of that right there, yes. Now, there are other variables. This individual was also intoxicated.
Okay.
It took several miles, obviously, to get this individual stopped. We had to use extreme cases there of trying to get this individual stopped.
You mind answering what type of vehicle was it?
And it was an Audi.
Okay.
I would say it doesn't, I mean, that's a large vehicle. So early on, when we saw the pandemic, we had a vehicle that was stopped at 145 miles an hour in western Kansas. Stopped, the individual was released for the speed. Individual proceeded down the road and was stopped again for 100 plus miles an hour. That was a Subaru. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a race car. It doesn't have to be the Hemi. It doesn't make a difference. This is what we have seen in our area as well as others. And when the crash happens, it's more severe.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just one more. Do you know the fine right now for if you guys pull someone over going 25 miles an hour? Do you know what that fine is?
I don't have that fine schedule, but it is a fine schedule that we have right there.
Well, my one concern, and you kind of addressed it earlier, my one concern is the difference between 75 and 100 is 25 miles an hour. But the difference between, 60 and 100 in Kellogg and Wichita is 40 miles an hour, and the difference between 35 miles an hour, or 35 and 100 is 65 miles an hour, but we're treating all those the same as 100 miles an hour is the reckless driving.
Yes.
From 25 to 65 or whatever. So that's but you did address it when you talked about the higher risk, the higher speed, the higher risk. So I do appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Cyward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for, I bet you got some stories because I was wondering what kind of car that was at 202 plus. Following with our ranking minority member here, is my question was, I understand what he's saying and I appreciate that because that was kind of my question too. If you're going 50 mile an hour to 25, that's just as dangerous. That's why I was wondering. So I guess that kind of answers my question. That's my concern. Is that, and it's a arrestable offense if it's over 100. Is it a mandatory arrestable offense?
At this particular time, it still comes to that point of whether the officer has discretion or so.
Okay.
Again, back to, I just don't want to get confused. So in a residential area, someone is traveling 35 miles an hour, school zone, whatever it is, those become the elements that could be a point of reckless driving as well, not just the speed alone.
Okay. Because I've seen them, like I said, on 54 in our small town, you'll be in a 20 mile an hour school zone, somebody going 50. That's, and if they'd hit a kids crossing at the crosswalk. The other question was, where does these high-speed tickets tend to be, on the turnpike or the interstates?
Anywhere in the state. That's why I was bringing up the variables there. You got them on the turnpike. You've been in western Kansas. We've seen them on 54, 400. We've seen them in Kansas City. In Kansas City, again, we're talking about a heavy populated area up there. We're seeing speeds 100 miles an hour there too.
I think that changes the way I look. One final question, if I can, is say that your child, I live in the country, about 20 miles from Wichita, 20 miles from Hutch, 20 miles from Kingman. It's about 20 miles everywhere I go. Say my grandkid was injured in a bad accident or was mauled by a dog and it's life-threatening and I'm rushing to town and I'm doing over 100, would I get arrested for that?
I'm not going to say what the officer would do. Those variables take in. Okay. Most of the time, what we'd say, call the ambulance and there's emergencies. We take that into consideration.
Okay, that was my question because again, a lot of people live a lot further than that from town and that's a life or death situation getting them there, so. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think Representative Howard was addressing some of it. I think we all know when we're going over the speed limit. When we're going down, we're hoping just nobody catches us, and we keep on driving. However, the question he just asked about if it's an emergency, that came up in a town hall meeting once, and someone said, yes, but if in the emergency I'm rushing because of something happened, and then I kill somebody trying to get there, Is there a justification for that? And the group of 200 said, no, there isn't a justification. You were worried and maybe not paying attention, but nevertheless, you created another problem at this time. So when I'm looking at your bill, what I hear from you is, number one, reckless driving. I was looking here to see, is there a definition of reckless? Because it seems like we all have our own interpretation of what reckless might be. And sometimes we try to justify why somebody is going as fast as they do. Or if I'm speeding, I justify I'm in a hurry, I got to get there, or whatever. But on the other hand, it's a safety issue is what I really hear. And I think it was the same thing with seatbelts. You know, people opposed it for years and years and years, some still do. But we know it saves lives. But that's somebody else telling me what I can or cannot do. I'm driving my car, and if I want to do 100, that's my business. Well, it is my business until I realize that someone else has made it a business. So my point would be, is yours more safety issues for the highway patrol as well as the driver or the other people that's on the road?
To your question, I believe it's everyone. I think when we're talking about safety, you look at the variables there of you, me, and many a times we look at law enforcement because they're out there in the cold and the rain and all the inclement weather, nighttime. But that can also be you or anybody else in this room that's traveling or coming to the Capitol or what have you there. And so it becomes that variable that we have to look at everybody's safety when it talks about individuals that errant in their driving.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For a final question, Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chair. Herman, thanks for being here. It's always good to see you, sir. My first question was answered over here, where I believe we're as far as where were you writing the tickets or where you're seeing it. It sounds like it's all over the place. So right now, is there a statute right now that you're aware of that if I'm over X amount of speed, I will lose a license? Or, you know, in other words, if I'm running 40 mile over the speed limit, what happens today?
Well, the way it's set up for a speed violation, just a speed violation, it is an infraction. In the past, in the days of myself and Ed Klump here, when we were there, certain speeds or so, you could actually arrest someone, take them before a magistrate, and they can post bond and what have you. The practice was, how we migrated to an infraction was an individual was given a citation and was not taken to a magistrate if they wanted to contest that or so. We were allowing individuals to sign a ticket, move on down the road, and they would have to appear. Accordingly, because of misdemeanor at that particular time, the law had changed to a point where it was an infraction where an individual could actually sign off that and then send in their money for the infraction. And there's a scale for the speed. So that's where it is an infraction. It really is still a traffic law, but it's in a different segment. So you got infractions, misdemeanors, and felonies. So with the infractions, individuals can receive a citation only and then send in the money and the court costs or so for that.
Okay. And then final question there, but I'm aware of, I think it was down just south of Wichita, they had stopped one a year or so back for doing 203.
Yeah.
And then there was probably one further up north. But when you're that much in excess, what's the process today?
One is to get the vehicle stopped as best we can or so. So obviously, I'm letting a secret out. We don't have a car that goes that fast. And if it's, often if it's something like that, the speed of a radio works so much faster. So at that point, if we can get a call ahead to arrange for someone to try to get the car stopped. If not, then we have our other techniques such as our stop sticks. Because now we're trying to reduce this individual from becoming a danger to so many others or so.
I'm focusing more on penalties right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That kind of an excess in speed, what?
It's a fine. Unless someone, because we do not take them to court, it's a fine they can send in. Other than that, if in excess of so many citations, the Department of Revenue could take action and suspend a driver's license or restrict it as such. But up to that point, an officer, basically their actions are just give a citation, provided there's nothing else, give a citation, and the individual goes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Colonel Jones, you've been on the hot seat. You've done it well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Committee, I bring your attention to written testimony in support from Ed Klump, representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriffs, and Kansas Peace Officer Association. I list no one as an opponent or as a neutral. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent or neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2628 and open the hearing on House Bill 2633. Revisor Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2633 provides for the City of Hutchinson and City of Topeka license plates. Section 1 provides for the City of Hutchinson license plate, and Section 2 provides for the City of Topeka license plate. Vehicle owner may be issued one of these license plates for a vehicle upon proper registration and payment of regular license fees. Additionally, the applicant for one of these license plates must pay either the county treasurer the logo use royalty fee established by the city, or present a logo use authorization statement to the county treasurer that was provided from the city upon payment of that royalty fee. The fee is set, like all other distinctive license plates, anywhere between $25 and $100. City of Hutchinson royalty fees will be used to support the Hutch Rec Foundation, and the City of Topeka royalty payments will be used to support the Friends of Topeka Zoo. Both of the license plates are subject to the usual distinctive license plates requirements. Design costs up to $5,000, and a requirement of initial issuance of 250 plates. As I said, royalty payments will be deposited into royalty funds established for the City of Hutchinson and City of Topeka for these license plates. And payments from those funds will be made on a monthly basis, either for the Hutchinson plate to the Hutch Rec Foundation or the appropriate designee of that organization. And for City of Topeka, it's the appropriate designation or designee of the Friends of Topeka Zoo. And a change of the city's designee can only occur on mutual agreement between the city and the designee. These plates pretty much match City of Wichita license plate that was enacted a few years back. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. As a proponent, first one, I represent Paul Wagner. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I am Representative Paul Wagner from Hutchinson. My written testimony on HB 2633 is before you. This type of license plate bill to the House Transportation Committee, I know you do see on a very regular basis. I actually grew up in Hutchinson. I went to high school there, worked at our family business for about 35 years, raised 3 kids in Hutch, but I'm not normally a big local flag type of guy. But the Hutch flag, I would say, is different. It has gotten a good amount of traction in our town. You see it on individual flagpoles. You see it in some businesses. Even our local Walmart actually has a whole, all in the customer service area, a whole panoply of City of Hutchinson flags. This flag, which I guess I will show you, I have a copy of it. This is actually a magnet that I have in my office, but it's just fairly straightforward flag, as it would be. This flag can and does create local spirit and goodwill. As a license plate, I think it will also then create revenue to the Kansas Department of Revenue and to the Hutch Recreation Foundation. I hope you will look favorably on HB 2633, and I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Does anyone have a question for the representative? Representative Delperdang. Representative Neely.
When you say the recreation, is there anything specific that they're looking at towards this money going towards and stuff that way?
We actually have, the next conferee is from the Hutch Recreation Commission, and he'll be able to answer that better than I.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know if today on the Hutch flag, is there any copyrights or anything? Because I know like we'll see the Keeper of the Plains in Wichita, but yet my understanding is that's I'm going to call it a copyrighted or registered emblem. So
it was kind of, what is that, actually a contest or something that they did originally back in like 2018. I think the city might have a copyright on it, but Mr. Finley from Hutch Rec likely would know better than I on it. But it was a unique creation, sponsored, a city-sponsored competition.
okay. For whoever's going to speak, if you have an answer on that and whoever's coming up, I'd love to know before we approve it and get someone in trouble. So
Yeah,
thank you.
fair enough.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Next proponent I have is Anthony Finley, Executive Director, Hutch Rec. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, ranking members, members of the committee, Anthony Finley, Executive Director, Hutchinson Recreation Commission, and on the board of the Hutch Rec Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to address you as a proponent for House Bill 2633. The city of Hutchinson adopted the Hutch flag in December of 2018, and as Representative Wagner mentioned, it has really taken hold in Hutchinson. Probably different scale than Wichita, but same influence as far as local pride and what that flag is. You see it in murals around town. You see it in front yards. Really, at Walmart, you see it everywhere. The Hutch Rec Foundation was founded in 1992 really to support the work of the Rec Commission, which includes all things recreation and parks, as you might imagine, in your local communities, what the recreation commissions do. The idea was brought up that we could create a license plate that would not only spread community pride that we're currently seeing, but also support our local efforts in parks and recreation. So definitely on behalf of Hutchinson Recreation Commission and the Hutch Rec Foundation, we support this legislation and look to carry it out. Happy to stand for questions. I'll first go to the open question about copyright. There is no copyright on the flag. It was open source. It was done by committee. The city of Hutch did approve it, but there is no copyright, and we wouldn't be restricted on anything.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, I would bring your attention to written testimony only from Representative Jason Probst, Deborah Tufel, Marla Boer, and Jackson Swearer. I have one written testimony in opposition. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? Okay. Mr. Dameron, welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I submitted, I was double booked today. That hearing kind of went away, so I had an opportunity to come here. Whitney Dameron, City of Topeka. We have asked to be taken out of the bill. We appreciate the intent of what the sponsor is trying to do. I would say, just for information of the committee, we weren't asked about it. City of Topeka does not want to be in a position where we're the ones to approve or disapprove a license plate, have to deal with approving something that someone applies for and takes down to DMV. Just as the Hutchinson flag, City of Topeka flag's an open source, we don't control that copyright or that approval process. And truth be told, I don't think the zoo wants this as well. I think they have their own ideas for fundraising. I don't speak on behalf of the zoo, but you have a representative from Topeka who's very much involved with the Topeka Zoo, and you might ask him as well. Also have with me today Amanda Stanley, city attorney for the city of Topeka, and I see in the audience Spencer Duncan, who's a city council member. If you wish to take it above my head and ask more official people about this. But we certainly don't oppose what Hutchinson wants to do. We just think the bill ought to be confined to that part of it and remove City of Topeka. Thank you.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Winnie, for being here today. Just a clarifying question. Are you speaking on behalf of the City of Topeka?
City of Topeka.
Okay,
yes,
awesome.
sir.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else have questions for Mr. Dameron? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for the accommodation.
Does anyone else wish to speak as an opponent? Are there any neutral? Hearing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2633. Committee, I would like to open it up for your thoughts on final action on House Bill 2597. Advisor Wagner, you can do it from right there if you please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2597 is a bill we heard last Thursday. It would create 4 new distinctive license plates for the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. The 4 license plates would be a state parks license plate, a hunting license plate, a fishing license plate, and non-game wildlife. The royalty payment established by the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks will be set anywhere between $40 and $100. That's an annual fee. And these plates are subject to the requirements of KSA 8-141. The disposition of the plates are kind of what's unique about this one. For a state parks license plate, the entire royalty payment shall be credited to the parks fee fund. And for a hunting, fishing, or non-game wildlife plate, the royalty payment will be deposited first in an amount equal to the cost of an annual park and recreation motor vehicle permit established in KSA 138-134. That'll be credited to the parks fee fund. Any remainder will be credited to the wildlife fee fund. And then Section 2 is amended KSA 32-901 to provide that a motor vehicle issued a license plate under Section 1 shall constitute a motor vehicle permit, allowing the driver the rights and obligations to enter a state park as if the driver were an annual permit holder for a valid Parks and Rec motor vehicle permit. That vehicle must also have a current unexpired registration and display the license plate actually on the vehicle. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for the reviser? Representative Probst. Representative Proctor.
I won't take it personal, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't know if this is for the reviser or for research, and I'm sorry, I must have missed it in the testimony. I'm looking at the fiscal note. What is the actual cost to develop the new license plates and who pays for those? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the design cost would be anywhere up to $5,000 per KSA 8-141, and that is paid by the Department of Wildlife and Parks.
Thank you.
And I guess I should say it's $5,000 for each license plate, so up to $20,000 since there's 4.
It's paid out of the agency, but that agency's paying out of state funds or fees, or what are they paying out of?
That I'm not sure. I just know that they are responsible for the costs. Jill saying it is a fee-funded agency, so presumably that's how they operate.
Further questions for the reviser? Seeing none. Committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 2597? Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, I move the adoption of the bill, please.
Got a motion and a second by Representative Hoheisel. Is there discussion on the bill? Seeing none, you may close.
Close on 2597.
You've heard the motion by Representative Helgerson to pass House Bill 2597 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. The next bill I'd like to have us take a look at would be Senate Bill 101. Revisor Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Senate Bill 101 amends the definition of electric assisted bicycle and provides for the regulation approved use thereof. Sections 1 and 7 expand the current definition of electric assisted bicycles and creates kind of 3 classes of those bikes that has an electric motor of less than 750 watts that meets certain requirements for each class. Class 1 is a pedal-only e-assistance that stops at 20 miles per hour, or the assistance stops at 20 miles per hour. Class 2 is a motor-propelled that the e-assistance stops at 20 miles per hour, and Class 3 is a pedal-only that provides e-bike assistance up to 28 miles per hour. The definition of an electric assisted bicycles is kind of exempted from multiple other definitions of other vehicles, just kind of as a technical matter. Section 9 amends the current statute governing the regulation. The bill provides that e-bikes will be afforded the rights and privileges of a bicycle rider and also subject to the duties of a bicycle rider. A rider of these e-bikes will not be required to maintain vehicle liability insurance, possess a driver's license, register the vehicle, obtain a certificate of title, or possess a license plate for the e-bike. The bill would also require a manufacturer's label to be placed on the e-bike that gives the class number, top assisted speed, and motor wattage of the e-bike. The bill prohibits tampering with that with the e-bike unless the label indicating the class is replaced. And the bill also includes language that these bikes may be ridden where bicycles are allowed, such as streets, highways, roadways, lanes, and paths or trails. But it does not prohibit a city from adopting ordinances governing the operation of e-bikes on streets and sidewalks under that city's jurisdiction. Provision also allows that a municipality, county, or agency may restrict or prohibit the operation of e-bikes on bicycle paths or trails that are under that jurisdiction. And I'd be happy to answer any question. I would add, if the committee would allow, I would prefer the bill or the motion to pass the bill to be a substitute bill motion. KSA 8-126 was amended last year, that covers the first 5 or 6 pages of this bill. So if it wasn't a substitute bill, we'd have to cross all of that out, and it just looks a lot cleaner as a substitute bill. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the reviser? Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Reviser. In this bill, is there a grandfather clause for 1,000-watt electric bikes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There isn't any sort of grandfather clause. The previous definition that allowed motors of up to 1,000 watts is replaced with the new definition that requires less than 750 watts. Sorry.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So because right now you can get online and you can buy a 1,000-watt bicycle for $3,000 plus. What happens to those individuals who are buying that today? One of those bikes, are they protected or criminals?
I would think they probably have to maybe register it as another type of vehicle, but I don't know if it would probably meet the definition of another vehicle under certain definitions, but as far as what would happen, it's not kind of spelled out what would happen to those in the bill.
Further questions for the reviser? Representative Minix.
Thank you. Chris, is there anything that would preclude municipal government from making some types of rules and regs to prohibit people that have had a DUI history and lost their driver's license from utilizing an e-bike within their city limits?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I believe on page 9, by giving them sort of home rule powers to govern the operation of electric-assisted bicycles on streets, highways, they could presumably create some sort of restriction like that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, committee, what's your pleasure? Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass House substitute for Senate Bill 101. Is that correct? Is that, yes. Okay. Favorably for passage.
Second by Representative Seibert. Are there questions or comments? Seeing none, you may close.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Helgerson to pass House substitute for Senate Bill 101 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. You wish to be recorded? Representative Jacobs would like to be recorded as a no vote. Committee, that completes our business for the day. Tomorrow we'll be hearing House Bill 2630 and plan on working House Bill 2567 and 2594. With that, we are adjourned.